International trade is one of those background systems you mostly notice when it falters. You feel it when the fruit at your market tastes like summer in the middle of winter, and you feel it when the electronics aisle has an empty space where the thing you wanted was supposed to be. It's the reason your shirt has a label from a country you've never visited, and why your favorite cafe can source beans grown on the other side of the world while paying through a banking system that makes the transfer feel like a simple swipe. If you peel back the surface, what you find isn't a single machine but a web. Ships and planes and warehouses, standards and paperwork and finance, politics and law and logistics, human relationships and trust riding on rules that try to smooth the edges. At its heart, trade is a practical response to a simple idea: no place can do everything best. Specializing, swapping, and coordinating can make us all better off, if we can bear the frictions and manage the fallout. The textbook story starts with comparative advantage, which sounds abstract until you think of your day. You could grow your own food, sew your own clothes, code your own tools, and repair your own roof. In theory. In practice, you specialize at something you're relatively good at, you earn more by doing that, and you use those earnings to buy what others produce more efficiently. Countries do the same at scale. Even if one country is absolutely better at making both wine and cloth, it makes sense for it to focus on the thing it's relatively more efficient at and trade for the other. These relative differences, multiplied across geographies and talents, unlock surplus. Prices drop, choices expand, and productivity climbs because factories and farms can focus, learn, and invest. But the clean lines of theory meet the messy curves of reality as soon as you try to ship a real good to a real customer. The modern miracle that made global trade feel almost boring for a few decades was a humble standardized box. Once goods could slip into identical containers that move from truck to train to ship without being touched, costs fell and reliability rose. Layer on barcode standards, better ports, and software that tracks a pallet like a parcel, and you get something close to magic. A washing machine leaves a plant on Tuesday and shows up at your door 2 Thursdays later after crossing an ocean. None of that works without an answer to a human problem older than ships. How do strangers, separated by distance and language, pay and trust each other? That's where trade finance sits, quietly essential. Banks step in with letters of credit that say, in effect, if the exporter proves they shipped what they promised, we'll pay them, and if the importer proves they received it, we'll release the funds. Insurers cover the risk that a storm, a strike, or a sanction derails the plan. Forwarders and brokers translate between the world of boxes and the world of rules, shepherding your goods through customs with the right codes, certificates, and signatures. It's a choreography that looks smooth only because countless small hands know the steps. Rules matter as much as roads. Over time, countries hammered out agreements to make trade more predictable. They cut tariffs, the obvious taxes at the border, and tried to rein in the subtler barriers, quirky standards, opaque licenses, temporary safeguards that last years. A global body emerged to referee disputes and nudge everyone toward transparency, and when global deals stalled, countries and regions stitched together their own pacts. The result looks like a bowl of spaghetti, overlapping agreements, each with its own rules of origin that decide whether your product really counts as from somewhere and can qualify for lower duties. That origin test is more than a stamp, it's a recipe. If your jacket uses fabric from one place, zippers from another, and is sewn in a third, does it meet the content rules of the deal you want to use? The answer changes your duty bill. These details are why big firms hire trade lawyers and why small exporters lean on savvy brokers. Tariffs get headlines because they're visible. The subtler barriers can bite harder. Think of safety rules for food, electrical standards for appliances, emissions tests for cars. On their face, These protect consumers and the environment. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they're a polite way to tilt the field toward domestic producers. The line between legitimate regulation and disguised protection isn't always clear, and even when intentions are good, different systems create friction. Mutual recognition and harmonization are the holy grails here. If your product meets our standard there, we'll accept it here. When that works, trade flows. When it doesn't, the same toaster needs multiple tests and labels. Trade creates gains, but it does not sprinkle them evenly. Consumers tend to win with lower prices and more variety. Firms that can plug into larger markets scale and learn faster. The economy as a whole tends to grow. Meanwhile, particular workers and communities can get squeezed hard when production shifts abroad or when a flood of imports meets local producers who can't adapt quickly. That distributional punch explains much of the modern politics of trade. The elegant promise that the winners could compensate the losers is true in theory and rare in practice. It requires policy choices, adjustment support, retraining that works, portable benefits, place-based investment that isn't theater, and time. Without those, the costs are borne by those least equipped to carry them, and resistance to trade rises not because people hate variety but because they feel like disposable parts in someone else's model. Services used to sit on the sidelines of these conversations because they seemed local: haircuts, hospital visits, legal advice. The internet changed that boundary. Now software updates cross borders invisibly. Designers collaborate across time zones. A radiologist reads scans from a continent away. A startup in one city sells a subscription to customers in 100 countries without a single warehouse. The rules for this world are younger and fuzzier. Data privacy laws decide what can cross borders. Digital taxes aim to capture revenue where value is consumed. Cloud providers become part of your supply chain. Suddenly, trade isn't just about ports and pallets but about servers and standards. The old questions reappear in a new key. Whose rules govern? How do you prevent abuse? And can you keep the benefits of openness without inviting harm? Currencies thread through all this like a current you only see when you fall in. Exchange rates shift, and with them, the effective price of your exports and imports. A stronger home currency makes foreign inputs cheaper and your goods more expensive abroad. A weaker one does the opposite. The pass-through from exchange rates to prices is uneven, and firms try to smooth the jolt with hedges, forward contracts and options that lock in rates for a time. At scale, countries worry about their balance of payments, the big ledger of flows in and out. Imbalances can be the sign of deep forces, demographics, savings habits, investment booms, or they can be the spark for political arguments about fairness and manipulation. In the meantime, the people ordering parts next quarter need an answer today, so they build buffers and pray the spreadsheet isn't lying. Global value chains used to be a hidden strength, parceling production across countries to take advantage of skills, costs, and capabilities. Then shocks piled up. A pandemic scrambled everything from microchips to masks. A ship blocked a canal and reminded everyone that a single point on a map could halt billions of dollars of trade. Drought narrowed another canal's throughput. Geopolitical tensions turned ordinary components into national security concerns. The mood shifted from just-in-time to just-in-case. Companies talked about reshoring, nearshoring, and friends whoring, moving production closer to home or to countries seen as politically aligned. The answers aren't simple. You trade off cost against resilience, speed against diversification, efficiency against redundancy. You start carrying more inventory of critical parts. You qualify a second supplier even if the first is great. You map your supply chain beyond your direct vendors to the sub-tier firms that actually make the key bit everyone assumes just shows up. Sustainability and trade generate a different kind of tension. On one side, trade enables cleaner goods to spread faster, helps solar panels, wind turbines, and batteries scale, and allows knowledge about greener practices to diffuse. On the other, shipping has a carbon footprint, and production in places with weaker environmental rules raises concerns about carbon leakage, moving emissions rather than reducing them. New policies try to square this circle. Border adjustments for carbon aim to price the emissions embedded in imports so domestic producers who decarbonize aren't undercut by cheaper, dirtier competition. That sounds tidy until you try to measure embedded emissions reliably across complex supply chains with inconsistent data. The effort, though messy, nudges firms toward traceability and cleaner processes, and it pushes shipping to decarbonize with new fuels and better design. Ethics travel along these routes too. Consumers and regulators are more likely to ask not just what a product costs but what it cost to make, in human terms. Were the workers safe and paid fairly? Was forced labor involved? Was the forest cleared illegally? The response shows up in due diligence laws, import bans on goods linked to abuses, and corporate commitments that require proof beyond glossy brochures. Traceability becomes part of the product. That might mean QR codes that trace a garment's fabric to a mill, or audits down to a smelter for the metal in a phone. The technology, the ledger that logs each handoff, the sensor that certifies a step, matters far less than the will to follow the chain and the consequences for those who cheat. Trade has a cousin that often carries more weight than people realize: investment. When a company builds a factory in another country or acquires a local firm, it isn't just shipping goods, it's embedding itself. Know-how moves with people. Standards travel with equipment. Supply chains get stickier because they're now relationships, not just orders. Rules for foreign investment reflect that intimacy. Some sectors are wide open. Others, telecoms, energy, semiconductors, are guarded, with reviews that weigh security and influence against capital and jobs. Export controls, another angle of geo-economic policy, now reach deeper into the guts of technology. A single advanced chip becomes not just a part but a strategic lever. That means firms whose business model depended on frictionless global tech trade must navigate a landscape where lines move and licenses can change overnight. If you zoom into the nuts and bolts, the romance fades and the real craft appears. Someone has to pick the right HS code for your product, the classification that tells customs what it is and how it should be taxed. Misclassify and you pay too much, too little, or get flagged for audits that delay shipments. Someone has to choose Incoterms, the little three-letter acronyms that say who bears which risks and costs at which stage, who pays the freight, who clears customs, who buys insurance. Get that wrong and you discover, at the worst moment, that the risk you thought someone else was holding is actually yours. Someone has to line up space on a vessel during peak season, when containers are scarce and rates soar. Someone has to prepare certificates and test reports that match the market's rules, labeling in the right language, voltage compatible with local outlets, safety marks accepted by local authorities. It's not glamorous work, but it's where deals become deliveries. For a small business, all this can feel like trying to cross a river by reading a map of all rivers. The shortcut is partners. A good freight forwarder is worth their fee. They'll translate needs into bookings, paper into compliance, and surprises into solvable problems. A bank with a trade desk can turn the poetry of a purchase order into the prose of a letter of credit. Local agents can help you find distribution, navigate culture, and avoid the meeting that looks promising but isn't. You don't have to know everything. You need to know enough to ask good questions and to see when advice doesn't pass the smell test. Start with one market, one product, one route. Learn, adjust, repeat. Technology keeps bending the shape of trade. Platforms let tiny producers sell to global audiences with payment, logistics, and returns bundled neatly behind a storefront. Predictive tools help forecast demand and steer inventory where it's likely to be needed. Digital customs windows allow pre-clearance that shortens border time. At the same time, rules multiply to tame digital spillovers, privacy regimes that limit where data lives, sovereignty rules that require local storage, digital service taxes that try to capture value that would otherwise escape the tax base. Companies find themselves doing a new kind of compliance, not just what's in the shipment but what's in the software and where the data flows once the customer starts using the product. There are old tropes about trade that don't survive contact with the present. One is that exports good, imports bad. In reality, imports are inputs for many exporters, and consumers' welfare matters too. Another is that trade is a zero-sum contest with a scoreboard labeled surplus. Running a surplus can reflect competitiveness. It can also reflect domestic weakness in consumption or investment. The healthier approach is to ask, does trade expand our productive possibilities? Does it make our economy more dynamic and our people's lives better? If the answer is yes, the follow-on question is how to distribute those gains and cushion the blows. If the answer is no in a particular sector or period, the remedy isn't to pretend the world went away. It's to invest in capabilities, enforce fair rules, and be honest about the transition. Politics will always course through these decisions. Voters care about jobs they can see and places they love. They worry about reliability when the things they need get stuck at sea. They worry about security when adversaries control critical inputs. Leaders respond with tariffs and quotas, incentives and subsidies, industrial strategies aimed at building domestic capacity in semiconductors, batteries, clean energy. Some of these bets are wise. Some overreach. The challenge is to build without sealing off, to protect without petrifying. Cooperation at the level of standards and science can coexist with competition at the level of firms. It requires a mentality that sees partners and rivals in layered ways rather than sorting the world into friends and foes once and for all. If you're trying to form a personal stance amid all this noise, a few principles help. Openness to ideas and goods is a force multiplier when paired with internal strength. Resilience isn't hoarding. It's smart diversification and clear eyes about where you're exposed. Fairness matters, and it's not naive to enforce it. Rules against dumping, forced labor, and theft of intellectual property are part of keeping a playing field we can all compete on. Adjustment is real work. Support it like you mean it or the backlash will be fierce and justified. And humility is a virtue here. The world is complicated. Good faith trade can lift living standards and still create pain. Protection can save critical capacity and still raise costs for the vulnerable. There are no free lunches, but there are smart ones. What makes international trade endearing, even in its sprawl and friction, is that it's a human story of connection under constraint. A farmer growing tea on a hillside thousands of miles away cares about rainfall and soil. You care about the taste in your cup. In between are pickers, packers, truckers, warehouse crews, brokers, bankers, inspectors, coders, and countless quiet decisions that align so your morning feels simple. When it works, you barely notice. When it breaks, you realize how interdependent we've become. The task now isn't to romanticize or reject that interdependence, but to steward it, make it fairer, cleaner, and sturdier, so the everyday miracle of a working global market can survive the storms we know are coming and the ones we can't yet name.